Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to be talking about some very charged things today. But before I get started, I just want to express my gratitude for very basic features of human existence, like being upright. That we still have a breathable atmosphere. That some fragment of the anciently conserved ecologies of Earth still thrives today. I'm here walking around, the the San Francisco Parks and Recs version of a habit trail, right? Oh, wow. Raven's grabbing up some. What does he or she like? He likes the leafless roots of an ivy plant. He's got about 5 of them, long strands, in his or her beak, and is now heading for a nesting location while being observed, as usual, probably by the female in this case. Among birds that mate, and lots of them mate for life. Mallards aren't among them. The white cheeks, the geese are. I'm not certain about the corvids' preferred habits, but whether or not they mate for life, and it appears they do. For example, I will see the same female with the same male over a period of many years. And this is, I will know this because I can recognize individual birds. Something we are not trained to do usually as modern humans, but something that when we are in a living place with other living beings is not merely handy, right? It's not merely utilitarian. We can learn all kinds of things about being alive, having a mind, or being animals. We can also learn astonishing things about being human animals by observing beings that have been literally embodying the same tradition, life paths, the same traditionally embodied life paths that each of them have. Now, some of them don't move. At least they don't leave their spot, right? Trees and bushes, herbs and grasses, what we call weeds, and so on. They travel vicariously on the wind, right, via pollen. So they travel, but they travel in an encrypted form. And then all of the other creatures who actually have ways of traveling. They can swim or fly or crawl or run or all three. And so by observing these creatures, we can learn a lot. I have learned a lot. Though I find the language a bit sketchy, I went to an auction, I bid on a lot, and I learned it because of animal help. But yes, instead of an auction, I'm at the library of the possibilities of human cognition or intelligence. Meaning the library of what is possible for humans, like myself, what is accessible, and what branches of that library are we trained to ignore, dispose of, denigrate, explain away with mechanics. Oh, it's just a machine. The duck is just a machine. It's just a biological machine. It's a duck factory. Its whole purpose for existing is simply to make other ducks and nothing else, right? I think if you know, it's funny. If the scientists had their way, we'd have to picture them holding a gun directed at any and every form of life on Earth, and declaring very tyrannically, "Reproduce now." Right? Reproduce. That's what you're here for. It's the argument to function, and as regards organisms, it must be wrong. Whatever, the scientists say there's no teleology, right? There's no purpose in nature. We've found no evidence of purpose. Hilariously, the purpose that drove the scientists to find no evidence is, knock knock, ding dong, right? Actually a purpose in nature, and it's the purpose of finding that there's no purpose. In this case, the scientists are hoisted by Gödel's petard, right? Which, if I've misunderstood it properly, goes something like this. In any formal system capable of producing the functionality we associate with arithmetic and perhaps times tables, there must be either A, true formal statements within the system that cannot be encoded within that system, and B, false statements within the system that can be proven. That last one sounds impossible, and I never really understood that previously. I got this from a lecture on physics as information that I was listening to yesterday, and by all means listen to lectures on this topic. This is really interesting. The teacher, it was like a Zoom class, and I can link it later. The teacher made some fascinating observations about the history of physics, from thermodynamics through the definition of entropy. And by the way, his definition of entropy was so trippy to me. I mean, really mind-blowing. And hopefully I'll give you some beautiful things before I get to the topic that I had in mind. Okay, so one of the ways that common people think of entropy is as energy loss, or... Pardon me. It's okay. Nice to see you.
I was trying to avoid
Yeah. So one of the ways that we think about entropy is, and some of what I'm going to say here may be wrong scientifically, but what I'm talking about is if you ask common people who haven't spent much time studying the topic, right? They might say something like, entropy is the homogenization of matter, so that the universe tends toward undisturbed, the energy state of a physical system will eventually homogenize so that it's all the same temperature, and maybe even it's all the same substance. End of the universium, right? So that there's this idea that the universe will die of heat death, which, if I understood it correctly, is something like a state where the universe is a single homogeneous temperature and probably a single homogeneous substance. There's nothing going on anymore. Infinite boredom forever after that. Whether something like that exists, I really can't say. Or, is even reasonably possible. I don't know. But I recall hearing a theory somewhat like this. Yeah. And, we are all very concerned with death in our own ways, or at least we're very concerned with avoiding thinking about it or doing anything about it, unless we have the intention to somehow become immortal by hook, crook mechanism or deal with the devil. Obviously, if one could make a quote deal with the devil, the best deal you could make would appear to be to never die, and that way never have to pay, right? It's like an infinite loan, a loan with an infinite term. And if a loan had an infinite term, by the way, something very peculiar about it. It doesn't matter how much of the term has elapsed thus far. The call date, right? The date that the sum becomes due, you never get any closer to it. Infinity is some really weird stuff. It's not a big number. We often think infinity is a really big number. No, it's not a big number. Infinity is an endless layered array of numerisms. Or, in some cases, one could say infinities represent the event horizon of mathematics, because certain concepts and ideas and stuff produce a profusion of infinities, thereby largely ruining the utility, in many cases anyway, of the math that does this. Turns out that there are weird problems in mathematics that require sort of tricks. Right? One of them is called renormalization in quantum physics or quantum field theory. Not sure if it's QFT or where renormal. Yeah, it's probably QFT. And many brilliant mathematicians who worked in the field and were experts, sort of shook their heads from side to side and said, shit, as long as we have renormalization, we sure as fuck don't know what's going on anymore. We can make the math work, but we're missing fundamental. It's obvious that we're missing fundamental understandings. And the same kind of remark is often made when equations produce a profusion of infinities, which are sometimes understood as tiny black holes. In any case, entropy. So, I'm not sure what's common these days because it's been a long time since I've done any reading in this field. But back in the 70s and 80s, actually 80s and 90s, when I was reading more biology and stuff like Maturana and The Keys to Knowledge. What is that book? Maturana. Can't remember the other author at the moment. Definitely want to recommend that book. It's on the concept of autopoiesis in biology. In any case, it was long claimed that organisms were negentropic, in that they could sort of hitchhike on contextual features so that they became homeostatic, in a way, self-generative entities. And at least on living planets, something like the opposite of entropy is happening as organisms. Now, that may not be the modern understanding or a common modern understanding. But the teacher of this course defined entropy in a really trippy way that I'd never heard before. And I'm a bit naive about such matters, even though I like to read about physics and so forth. Hello. He defined entropy as a measurement of the number of states a system could be in that are either inaccessible to us, in other words, there's no way to understand them for humans, or would have the same external appearance as other familiar states, therefore disguising themselves to us, right? So the number of states that either we can't know or perhaps don't presently know. And that's a really different perspective. I wish I could say it more concisely. It might be just something as simple as the number of states a system may be in that we don't know. And then there are different kinds of not knowing, right? Impossible, possible but not understood, and what else? Apparently the same as other states, with no way for us to tell the difference between them. Something like those three, perhaps. So that was really fascinating and provocative. When physicists say very stupid things, and maybe they're just doing this to get a rise out of their peers or their audience, things like, why would any intelligent species cross thousands of light years to visit humans who are stupid and dumb and reckless on Earth? There's nothing. We're boring as hell. We can't do anything interesting yet, like traverse space-time. Problem is, if you have a species that's absolutely bent on weaponizing every finding of science that they possibly can in a breakneck race to mutual annihilation, you have a species that's doing that at the group level. It doesn't matter that there are good humans or, even groups of humans that are not particularly harmful. What matters is sort of the generalization of the curve, and the generalization of the curve is weaponization. Right? The human groups play zero-sum games with incentives that grow more perverse over time, meaning that as time proceeds, the seeming benefits of winning, quote-unquote, an unwinnable situation, such as mutually assured destruction, grow dramatically. Right? So that eventually, in a sense, you have a situation where you've built 19,000 weapons of different kinds, each with unique triggers, and you just keep caressing those triggers until one of them causes half of them to go off, right? So that's the kind of situation you have with humans as a species on Earth. And the most important thing is to not let that out of the box. And I have suggested so one of the things the professor was saying that was super trippy and actually makes great sense to me is that there's a radically different way to think about physics that has nothing much to do with particles and forces at all. If you want weapons, then you want to understand how to direct forces. If you want intelligence or insight, if you want understanding, if you want wisdom, then you will massage the data, right, in order to squeeze out of it the ideas, right? The features of physics, time-space metric, gravity, light and its movements, entanglement, quantum electrodynamics, all these things. These are models of the underlying nature of physical phenomena, and as such, they give you ways of thinking about identity, value, nature, function, origin, meaning, that without them are impossible, or at least appear to be. I suppose you could catch them. You could inherit them from a being that was carrying them and was capable of and motivated to communicate them to you, right? Which perhaps is part of why some people, very few alas, listen to my recordings. The hope is that, my hope actually, is that we together can create and discover ideas that will radically alter our experience of being human and the opportunities that we can pursue in our lifetimes in such a way as to live meaningful lifetimes, not according to some societal standard, according to the standards from which all other standards are derived, those of the universe, creation, nature, however you want to paint some face noises on the foundational situations. And probably the foundational situations are not physical in the ways that we are inclined to suppose. They are not physical in the ways we teach our children. They are not physical in the ways we suggest, imply, assert, or demand of each other. Meaning they are not merely physical. The materialist agenda in science and philosophy is going to paint a lot of people's faces with poo in the long haul, presuming that we get to have one. So what the teacher was saying, and this is probably well known in the discipline of physics, I just never encountered it directly, I've been very interested in information theory, and particularly certain specific domains of linguistics as they relate to cognition, and particularly what I might refer to as psycholinguistics, at least in theory, if not in academic formalisms. I've long been interested in these matters as a creative person, as an artist, a poet, a writer, and something I might describe it as a citizen researcher, meaning someone who runs experiments to try to improve my awareness of complex features of a topic that otherwise tends to get trivially dismissed with a label, right? The terribly unfortunate thing about being human is that once you can pronounce a word as complex as psycholinguistics, you're inclined to think you understand what it refers to. Right? There's a balloon popping value to saying the phrase quantum electrodynamics. Right? So ordinary people are like, what the fuck does he know about quantum electrodynamics? Well, what do I actually know? I mean, in my case, it would be a little difficult to say. Let's say I read Feynman's QED, which is a book that tells sort of the history and teaches any practitioner how to do scattering diagrams, which is pretty fucking crazy, right? You've got like a broken monkey running around on Earth, half insane, and they can sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil and a little bit of data and produce scattering diagrams. Now, of course, to actually understand scattering, you have to produce hundreds of thousands of those diagrams, probably, which is unrealistic for a human, but entirely coherently realistic for machines. I don't know a lot about QED. I understand basic features of the concept is what I would say if someone asked me. I know the phrase. I know what a scattering diagram is. I know something about who Richard Feynman was. And, you know, there's a book about it, which I've read a couple of times. And I love reading. Again, because I don't intend to run scattering diagrams. But the concepts encrypted inside the findings of science, that stuff is the actual value. The value isn't what can we build with it to kill each other and everything that moves and much of what doesn't. Right? I just want to be really clear. That is not the value of scientific discovery. And as I've argued many times in the past, and as I've failed to enact myself, if I am indeed a citizen researcher, is that, I think it's funny when Eric Weinstein says, is that? Is that, right? It double is it? I think that's pretty trippy, linguistically. So, a scientist that was actually ethical, if the humans were intelligent, right, they would establish a system together for each other in the future of life on Earth that prohibited the weaponization of scientific findings for profit, war, coercion, or any other, use. The problem was apparently our civilizations, our societies, what we call nations and states and so forth, these are lethally armed zombie functions that will end our lives. If we manage to survive through some, series of life phases as a human being, and then, pass away, quote unquote, naturally, then it won't be true for us personally. It will be true for everyone that we love. It will be true for most, if not all, of nature around here. So apparently, our nations think the living planet is a hostage you point a gun at, and then you squeeze it ever more tightly to produce short-term benefits for tyrannical hegemonies inside and outside governments, the prison, military, corporate industrial complex. That's a moniker that keeps getting new. That's an octopus that keeps growing new arms, right? I think it used to be just the military industrial complex. Then it was the military prison industrial complex. Then it was like the military prison industrial mimetic complex, and it just keeps, getting a new tentacle every so often, right? Every few years, much faster these days than it used to grow tentacles. So this brings me to my point, but before I go there, if we ask basic questions about our nations and our societies, they will flunk those questions. Are they intelligent? Absolutely not. Are they bent on destroying life on Earth? Absolutely they are. Are they spending most of their money to kill? Yes, they are. Do they make money by killing? Yes, they do. Do they make money from putting people in prison? Yes, they do. Do they get power from these things? Yes, they do. Do they lie to children about the nature of humanity, identity, reality? Yes, they do. Do they do this inveterately? Yes, they do. Is there anything standing in the way of them just becoming more virulent over time? No, there is not. Nothing. There's no buffer. There's no kill switch. There's nothing. Are they heartless and inhuman? Yes, they are. Will they stop at nothing to continue these bizarre and lethal regimes, game theoretical nightmares, and the weaponization of everything that can possibly be consumed and or captured? Yes, they will do that so hard that, if we get 5 more years, it'd be a miracle. And what do I mean by if we get 5 more years? Well, I'll explain that. So, the stuff that we're calling society and civilization is short-term unsurvivable. And anybody who's got much of a few brain cells left can see that. And in a situation where anyone can see that, you quickly enter a race to the bottom where the primary players will throw down. And when they do throw down, if they haven't already, right, if it's not happening this moment in 5 or 10 ways that we're not very well equipped to detect, then, our lives, the entire human project, the entire history of the human project on this planet will be snuffed like a fucking candle in an hour. Not over weeks or months or years. On a single day at a single time. I'll get to that. Now, what I found trippy about the professor's lecture was he implied that physics is fundamentally a topic that if you're not, he didn't say that if you're not trying to build weapons with it, but it's obvious, is a topic of how information and transformations are communicated across various kinds of boundaries. It's a communications topic. It's a signaling topic. And that makes so much sense to me, because for any species that wasn't oriented to make infinite machines until they die, or to produce every weapon they can possibly imagine and then some, they would look at nature and see something blatantly obvious. It is a chorus. It is a synchronized, orchestral symphony of unimaginable age and sophistication and profundity. Profundity of origin, nature, form, purpose, yes, telos, and intelligence. People will argue, well, our nations can give us cars and houses and central heating and stoves and distributed water and sewage systems, protect us from disease and so forth. We could do that too. In fact, it's actually us doing that. We're just doing it inside a set of dead inside algorithms that will snuff our species, left to their infinitely malignant and captured present forms. So what I really loved about what the teacher was saying was, and the class is physics as information. And obviously he's going to define information. One way of understanding it is intelligible or intelligent, sometimes intentional, transformation energy exchanged between what we might think of as reference frames. And that definition, I would argue that the real definition is probably something much weirder and more beautiful and not analytic and not abstract.
Because it's like part of your identity.
In other words, presuming that our nervous systems are not the only locus of intelligence in our body, being that all of our tissues are forged from cells that themselves were forged from a single pair of cells, pluripotent cells became specific body tissues, and organs and so forth, including the nervous system, during the process of embryogenesis. And then post-embryogenesis, when the fetus is launched effectively into the outer space of the physical environment, it then transforms in synchrony, an attempted synchrony and concordance with that environment in various ways, including picking up some 35 trillion approximately bacteria over time and being colonized by those bacteria. Were we not being colonized by the bacteria, we would not be alive. Our kind of animal is born half complete in terms of cell population. We have to adopt the rest from nature. And from the stuff the humans engineer. One thing I find kind of humorous is that analytic, scientific, and medically oriented humans will think things like the property is in the kind of bacteria, so that, for example, they will give you pills that have probiotics which are grown in a lab. It's hard to imagine how confused that may be. That may be exactly the wrong thing to do. Because the probiotics that we acquire when we eat foods grown outside the weaponized landscape of human industry, right, then we get organisms that have been relating with other organisms for countless trillions of life years because they are bacteria. So time for them is not the same thing. What you get when you take bacteria from a lab should not be called the same thing. The fact that both of those are bacteria is nearly meaningless, right? Imagine that, I mean, they are like little transformers, but they're little living transformers. What I'm arguing is that the ones that come authentically from nature, rather than from bioengineering by humans, are different. You can imagine a human that was grown in a box. What benefit would you be likely to acquire from relation with them? Not much. Human grown in the wilderness. What benefit? Lots. For one thing, if you kiss the human grown in the wilderness, you will get microbiota from the wilderness. If you eat with the human from the wilderness, you will get microbiota from the wilderness. There are many cases in English where class and category put us to sleep. They entrance us so that we think we know what's going on, when in fact, right? Yeah, I mean, an example from our actual lives would be the death of flavor in tomatoes. I've eaten actual tomatoes. I don't know how to describe the efflorescent wonder that happens in my body and my mouth when I chew, taste an actual tomato, which still occasionally happens. There are other tomatoes which are technically tomatoes. You don't want to eat them, ever. I'm not sure if they have leucopene or whatever the chemistries that a tomato bursting with flavor might have. I doubt it, right? Seems impossible that they're the same thing. They are in language. And we have the same problem with our nations and civilizations. And many people will come to me and they'll argue, not many, some people, will come to me and argue, this is the greatest nation on earth. GNOE, right? But all you need to do is really just move those letters around a little bit. GONE. The greatest nation on earth is missing in action. It's gone, right? Because all of its functions are zombie functions that cannot serve their intended purposes, because to do so would be to defect from ensuring their nominal immortality over the short term, right? I was listening to an author, if I can see who it is, I think here, probably, let's find out. Either Annie Johnson or Annie Jacobson. I think she was on Chris Williams' podcast. I may have both those names wrong. My mind is otherwise occupied at the moment. But she had written a book, I think just entitled Nuclear War. And if you've been listening to my recent recordings, you may note that Eric Weinstein is very concerned about the humans getting off Earth because he's an intelligent, insightful human being, I think. And it's obvious to him that we'll be lucky to last a decade under current circumstances. Let me explain why he might think that. And so we need to get off planet. And my retort is, I'm pretty sure that outside of Earth, many intelligences exist. Just like if we lived on an island in the Pacific and we'd never gone to the other continents, there might be humans who would think we are the only people there are. We are the people. We are the people. We're not a people. We are the people. And this is how humans pretend this, right? Even though they see all around them myriad life forms derived from the features of space-time, endless quantity, like giraffes and elephants and whales and all these things, right? All these beings, they see this and they think, no, this is the only one. Well, okay, you can think that if you want. It's very unlikely to be true because you won't, in a glass of water, what you won't get are examples of things that aren't in the water and aren't in the context. And that's the argument to accidental mechanical origination of life on Earth. Right? It was just, this planet got lucky with the right variables and the right substances in the right situation that life just bubbles out of that. Very fucking unlikely. I mean, wildly unlikely. So, if physics is communication, this adds a lot of momentum to my suggestion that physics is intentionally encrypted. When we read old biblical stories, or para-biblical stories too, about there used to be a universal language, and it was very important to put an end to that in the humans, to scatter the languages and make them incomprehensible to one another. The putative purpose there was to keep us from attacking heaven. Why would anyone be interested in keeping the humans from attacking heaven? Well, because they will. They're more interested in weapons than relationships, than gods, than survival, than their children, than living planets. Weapons are the ultimate reason for human existence, apparently, at the broad scale. So, the only thing that accomplished, the confusion of the languages, was making it take a bit longer. Okay? Of course, that was combined with things like worldwide flooding, earthquakes, ice ages, occasional catastrophic impacts from space, possibly actual weapons being detonated here by NHIs or ancient humans. Though most people have been trained to exclude both of those possibilities, that's unfortunate because the universe is vastly more complex, intelligent, and alive than our parochial nonsense that we were drilled with by physicalist, materialist science and philosophy. It's no wonder they think organisms are just machines. Their minds have emulated their products to the degree that they've evicted like 80% of their available functions and senses and opportunities. And they want to make sure they're evicted for everyone. Right? This is a militaristic dogma, materialism, particularly in science, and it's a fierce one. If you, as a scientist, suggest that things look a bit more complex than the straight materialist arguments could possibly explain, you can kiss your tenure goodbye, and probably your private life too. The cohort you chose will come after you in numbers. So, the author I was listening to had written a book on nuclear war, and I previously read an amazing book that I would strongly recommend, which is called Thinking in an Emergency by Elaine Scarry. And Scarry lives up to her name, but she's very articulate, intelligent analyst. And what she's talking about are the different plans in different countries for civil defense. And I think she names, I can't remember all three countries, but it's Switzerland, possibly Finland or Norway, and the United States. And if I recall correctly, what she says, it goes something like this. In Finland and Norway, something like a very high percentage, let's call it 70 or 80% of the civil defense budget goes specifically to protecting the citizens of their country in the event of either a war or a coup, both. So that means physical shelters in every house. It means tunnels inside mountains that contain hospitals, libraries, universities, military barracks. It means protecting the citizens. If I recall correctly again, the civil defense budget of the United States is primarily deployed, 97% of it or something, to protect one man, the president. And maybe, conceivably a few members of the cabinet. Here's how much gets spent to protect citizens of the United States. Effectively nothing. Nothing. Why would that be? Because in the event of a nuclear war, there will not be any citizens of the United States. There's nothing to protect. Those people will all be gone, and they'll be gone in a heartbeat. So the agenda of the civil defense budget in the United States has nearly nothing to do with protecting American citizens. It is presumed there won't be any. Now that's pretty fascinating by itself, because it demonstrates that any discussion of the well-being of the citizens of our country is effectively controverted by the actual situation, agendas, functions, and behaviors of our government. Let me get really clear about what that means. It means that in our time, and probably for some time before our time, the well-being of the citizens of the United States is a kind of a behind-your-hand joke, right? It is nominal in that officials and authorities will speak as if that's the prevailing goal, when the actual prevailing goal is to engineer a situation that disposes of them. And there are various different ways to go about that. One may presume, I believe, that there are in the United States vast networks of underground bunkers, possibly even things resembling cities, military installations for certain, that would protect and possibly preserve the lives of people with enough wealth, power, or influence to weasel their way onto that list and to have a plan to get there within 60 minutes of a launch, because that's about how much time you might have, possibly less. So there is a plan in some probably shadow branch of our government to preserve, at least as long as possible, in the event of a nuclear war, a fragment of our population, but primarily the people who will be preserved are the people we won't need anymore because we won't be here. Right? Their provisional protection of us will not only come to an end, it will flip over, and there will be no protection for us. We may even be, it's really easy to get away with a crime that you can't be accused of, right? This is the whole idea of having an alibi. Yeah? And if factions within the United States government decided that we're going to pull the trigger so that from now on all remaining resources come to us, say the 0.006%, 0.0003% of the U.S. population that can be sequestered, right? I mean, there's a science fiction story here where they do the sequestering pre-launch, and then they just engineer a crisis. There's all kinds of really scary science fiction scenarios here. But I want to be really clear about the situation we're actually in, because, Eric was saying he'd like to see rare and probably low yield atmospheric nuclear tests. I think that's a terrible idea. But he is right about one thing, kind of, which is that the modern people have no idea. They don't realize that our nation and the governments of the world have placed a series of straight razors against every, artery accessible from the surface of our body. And, if anybody moves, at the first sight of blood, everyone dies. Everyone. Now. Not over weeks or months or years or hundreds of years. Immediately. Everyone dies. So let me make a few analogies of this just to drive the point home, because Eric thinks that if we're properly scared by our understanding of nuclear war, we might do something. And I would argue back that frightening, helpless, disoriented people is a mean and mostly useless move. The only possibility for meaningful orientation of the people is to give them a way to be something different that takes the reins away from the zombie functions that presently run our planet and places them where they belong, in the hands of the actual people. And in the hands of the actual people, unencumbered by propaganda and bullshit and lying and so forth, we would dismantle those weapons, just as John F. Kennedy probably intended to do before they snuffed him. And probably Khrushchev, too. But Khrushchev couldn't if Kennedy wouldn't. So, the powers then operant in and as our government in the United States hard to say exactly who those people were, but one thing that's obviously clear is that the present president is not the seat of power in our nation. The seat of power in our nation lies primarily in shadow branches of government, the private sector, quote unquote. I mean, what should that be called? The terminally monumental yeah, I don't know. We got to think of some really bad name for the corporations, because they keep steering us to end game. So allow me, and I apologize in advance for needing to do this, but if we want humans to understand the situation with nuclear weapons, just those, right? Never mind bioengineered weapons, never mind 19 other things I can point directly at the blades that are sitting against our arteries together right now. We'll just take nuclear weapons. Imagine if a company said to you that in order to ensure your safety and the safety of your family and the safety of your lineage, right, we have to put a bomb in your house. And the bomb will obliterate everything in this house if we feel that there's a significant enough threat to your safety. We will detonate the bomb at a time of our choosing. And if any of these bombs detonate in anyone's house for their safety, all of the bombs will detonate and everyone will die for their safety. So if somebody came to you and made you an argument like that, they'd have to hold a gun to your head or threaten your children or your ancestors or something to get you to even talk to them. But this is what has happened. We have imported apocalypse directly into our private, personal, communal, historical lives. This bomb is in every house on Earth. And it's like I said earlier, it's like they keep building triggers, they keep building weapons and pointing them at life on Earth and, the humans, the humans and by proxy life on Earth. And then they keep caressing the triggers until one of them blows. And then they, historically that has been whenever one of the triggers blows, historically, and so war ensues, then that's big business for capitalism or communism or any ism, Nazism, whatever kind of ism you like, that isn't humanism, obviously. So previously, that's been the biggest business opportunity ever, which is part of why no one really gives a flying fuck about ecology. They don't care. It's not humans that are doing the harm. It's these zombie functions running humans as like dead algorithms in the commercial, political, and military behavior of our nations and societies. And let me be absolutely clear, that stuff will snuff you. It will snuff your children. It will burn the libraries to the ground. Cynical people will say, yes, and it's about time. I'm not among their number. I love the humans. I believe in the human experiment. I love nature and biology, the organisms even more. I love time-space. I love everything that is part of existence as we know it on this planet. And I want to protect it. Not in language, in fact, in behavior. We must transform the human project. That bomb is in every house, and there's a couple of really thin little threads holding the detonator in the off position, and it's spring-loaded to go to on with, a countdown of 60 minutes. So this is every human life, every animalian life, every bit of plant life on this planet is currently being held hostage by insane things that are neither human, nor civilized, nor societies. They are the dead, lumbering, zombie-like, vampiric husks of what once might have become societies, but intentionally failed to in order to capture. Right? It's almost like a strange mythic story where one has to wonder, how does the altruism turn to omnicide under the flag of virtue? Because every culture raises the flag of virtue. Right? They're like, we are the best nation on earth. Let me be really clear to you. It won't fucking matter which nation you live in. That will not matter at all. If you're being held hostage by a drooling, insane psychopath, addicted to war, prisons, drugs, rape, every other malignant inaction of defection from being human, it will not fucking matter if yours was the good one. Right? They sink or swim together. The argument that, well, this is we got to protect the American way of life. Buddy, the American way of life was buried in a fucking swamp in Mississippi 40 years ago. Minimum. Right? They snuffed that thing and buried the corpse everywhere they could and replaced it with functions that signal virtue while accomplishing mostly atrocity and bank account stuffing. And allow me to be really clear, the human beings in the core positions of power have so defected from humanity that it would be entirely unsurprising if some of the most bizarre claims we've heard about their rituals turned out to be true. Because the more you defect from your humanity, it's not just a slippery slope, it's a black hole problem. Once you enter the event horizon, you're kind of done for. You're just going to sink to lower and lower. So it consumes these people from the inside, most of them. And some of them are and have been motivated to actually protect the people and the planet. But it should be obvious that they better keep that under their hat, because the entire team has a completely opposite agenda. So, it's been 50 years that a knife has been sitting on that thread, that if it snaps, the bomb in every home on earth will go off over the course of 1 to 2 hours. One of the things that Anne was saying that is probably not known by most American people, because hopefully, on the one hand, they're not sitting around thinking about nuclear war because there's no fucking way they can affect it that they can understand. So someone has to stand up and give them away, right? Somebody's got to come to the podium and give the people something they can actually do together so that they can be together and form a we intentionally to pull those fucking detonators, right? I can just hear the arguments against it, but my point is, a straight razor's resting on that thread every day, all day long, in such a way that if one of the bombs goes, if anyone launches, everyone launches. There's a policy in the United States military that is taken extremely seriously. A couple of policies. The first principle is use it or lose it. In a nuclear exchange, what you don't launch, you lose. And the other policy is launch on warning. You don't have time to fuck around. You get a warning, you got, if you're lucky, 30 minutes fly time. So you don't sit around equivocating. You launch. And if, North Korea, for example, launched a nuke, the United States would respond immediately. For, in accordance with these protocols. Again, you got dead fucking functions. You have dead functions with their fingers on nuclear triggers around the world. A few primarily, China, the Soviet Union, North Korea. I don't know what the layout of the nukes are. I'm sure Britain has some, France has some, other countries may have some. But it's obvious that the countries that don't have them probably aren't going to need them and won't benefit from having them either way. Because if you're not a country of the size of China or the Soviet Union or the United States, if you're a small country, launch is a suicide, for sure. It's a suicide anyway, but for a small country, there's no chance of your country surviving it. So, one of the things the humans don't know is that in the event of a nuclear exchange, which in the author's book she proposes a scenario, which she calls a scenario, where North Korea launches on the United States. And one of the things that has to happen is that missiles that we would fire from bases in the United States and from probably a good chunk of the ocean, presuming that we were firing missiles from the United States, these missiles have to cross through Russian airspace to reach their targets. So what you can do, you call up the Kremlin and go like, we've been launched on by North Korea. We just want you to be aware that the MIRVs that are currently entering your airspace aren't actually targeted at you. Is Russia supposed to believe that? Do you think they don't have launch on warning protocols? Right? This is why Khrushchev and Kennedy went nuts, like literally out of their minds with terror over what happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and probably privately arranged to begin the process of disarming the missiles. at that time, and in many situations since then, some of which we know about, many of which we don't, somebody started to, push that straight razor back and forth along that thin little thread. And let's be clear, it doesn't take much of a push. All games end there. All minds end there. All of human history ends there. Everything we lied about ends. We live in a situation where at every moment of every day, various forces are caressing the triggers of apocalypse and winking at each other and playing brinksmanship games for hegemoniacal status. There is no sociological or political or academic purpose more important than dismantling the arsenals of the nations and creating a way of being human together where we can actually experiment with meaningful, intelligent proposals about how to live together, communicate, and learn. We must establish something that outcompetes the monsters that own our lives. Together, somehow. Am I willing to work on it? Absolutely I am. I'll work on it 24/7. I'll work on it 10 hours a day till the end of my life, quite happily, with any who are sincere and serious. And I have some ideas about it. I'm not just making face noises about the danger. In a situation this dire, almost doing any other thing succeeds very quickly. I think the humans will eventually discover that what we call physics isn't a set of laws. The universe isn't a courtroom. There's no judge with a gavel sitting above creation, banging out the stone tablets on which the speed of light and the fine structure constant and big G, the gravitational constant, and other constants. There's no such thing going on. I was listening the other day to Rupert Sheldrake, and he was saying something really profound. I listened to his TED Talk, which was banned, and I think it's a perfect example of what I'm trying to say. Cancellation was going on long before woke culture. Cancellation was the weapon of the entrenched power structures in corporations, the academy, and the governments and the military. Just taking a little stretch here. Sheldrake and also Graham Hancock are two minds that come. It's funny, two minds that come to mind, two names that come to mind, two lives that have been profoundly affected by attempted cancellation, and probably in some cases attempted assassination. Those two things go hand in hand. And they weren't canceled by, the proponents of linguistic policing, microaggressions, the dictionary of microaggressions, LGBTQ plus rights. They were not canceled by left-leaning liberals, LLLs. They were canceled by a sort of, a conspiracy of doctrine. What really is, in effect, an old boys club and a secret society that's half secret and half oblivious to its own existence, right? Where, doctrine in 18-something, some guy said, the pyramids were built by grinding stones with ordinary tools. And from then on, anyone who said anything else was, put to the Inquisition. But Sheldrake was saying something really trippy. He was saying, see if I can remember it. I think he was talking about 9 or 10 fallacies of modern science. But one of them is that the constants are constants. He went and looked at old physics texts, early texts, that provided measurements for the speed of light. And he discovered something very peculiar. Something that shouldn't happen in science, yet happens all the time. He discovered that light had been measured, I think it was 20 kilometers per second slower. And many of the measurements agreed, within tolerances. And so he went to, it's hilarious where he went. He went to the institution whose job it is to establish, correct, and maintain measurements. And he spoke with the gentleman who was running this organization, apparently. And he said, I went and looked, and the speed of light was different. And the guy told him some really bizarre story in which they had decided to generalize the speed of light and to establish the meter, right, a physical space measurement of a meter, in those terms, thereby making it impossible to get any differing measurement at any time in the future. In other words, they rewrote what they measured the speed of light against so that it would always produce the same result, whether it were varying or not. And they had done something very similar with other constants, including big G, gravity. And research that questioned any of this was roundly dismissed, destroyed, remained unpublished. So, once again, what science might be for humans and what it actually is for humans are nothing like the same thing. And the latter will keep producing nooses that tighten not only around the neck of every living being, they they have the capacity to snuff the whole experiment. And people are like, oh, the Earth's resilient, don't worry. Well, Mars was probably resilient once too. You might have a few microbes and possibly some underground bases there. But those aren't Martians. If there are beings there, they're not from Mars. And those microbes don't help you much, right? If your only incarnation option is a bacteria, you're going to have a rough life. And you're going to have a lot of them to get anything done. So, I don't want to just present the shadow, but we need to really take a cold, hard look at these features of our situation as modern humans together. We need to take a look with and for each other. We need to take a look with the purpose of understanding, preserving, actually protecting each other, life on Earth, and the history and future of the grand experiment of this living planet, and within that, the human experiment, the human branch of that experiment. If the Earth is a being, she must be extremely confused about the behavior of her humans. If there's something that resembles an oncologist for a living planet, and Earth somehow, booked a visit, the results of that visit would be absolutely terrifying. I'm sorry, Terra Invisibilis, but your most complex species of animal has gone batshit malignantly insane and is metastasizing. We're going to have to turn the volume down on that right away, and that might mean killing most or all of them. Unless the oncologists were really, really intelligent and really wise and also anciently experienced, right? The oncologists had done this for many living worlds. In that case, the oncologist might say, okay, we need to burn off the zombie function running people and preserve enough culture that you can regrow the species. And we need to implant in the survivors the imperative to protect living beings. Above all other bullshit, right? Protect living beings, because time-space may have many, many living worlds, but each one of them is very precious locally and produces, does things, right? Is actually up to something. Living planets are up to something that contributes to the well-being of living planets all over the place. And stars are, involved in this conspiracy. This is a conspiracy of beings, not objects. Beings with children, like us. So, my friends, it is evening on the day when we lost an hour. It's interesting. Okay, right. I see. I was not fundamentally aware of that until later in the day. I am grateful for this time together, and that our world still has an atmosphere for the moment. Business as usual will not continue, mark my words. Something... 9 things wicked this way come. And they wear human faces, but they aren't human. And they wear the faces of nations, but they are not nations. And they wear the faces of benefactors, but they are not benefactors. So let us turn our minds and hearts in a direction that leads to something resembling the end of the house bombs and the end of the institutions that manage and propagate them. I will. I am. I agree. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together, to see better, to see more clearly, again, very soon. May your life be beautiful and your dreams enriching. Bye-bye for now.